What is the best way of destroying your enemies? Some suggest stabbing them with pointy objects. Conceptually, that's a great idea, but you quickly run into issues. When you are in stabbing range, your enemies tend to stab back, and that can hurt. That's not very nice of them, is it? How about a ranged projectile? Bows, crossbows, and even boom sticks are great for destroying your enemies at a distance, but we quickly run into the same issues, namely that your enemies can also use projectiles back at you. Very annoying. If only there was a way to destroy them with the environment or something. Set up a zone of sorts that when they enter, they just stop being a problem. Or to that effect, introducing attrition. If you ever want to experience it, send your entire army into an Arctic province, and with the combination of the abysmal supply rate as well as the natural attrition rate, your stack should be demolished in no time. But we can go further than that. Let's stack max attrition for enemies, and make them truly suffer. The ultimate risk-free way of destroying your enemies in question. No fighting if necessary. Disclaimers, we are stacking max attrition with attrition modifiers here today. We're going for max attrition possible on one province, nothing else, nothing more. As always, we won't be going back a patch, and I won't be doing things that I consider an exploit. But with that being said, standard setup, Ironman compatible, no customizations. Let's go. So, let's get into the game itself here then. We have two counters today, the current attrition we cause and the attrition cap, which starts at 5%. This brings us to an interesting point. We're going to be restrained by the base game cap of 5% attrition, and hence getting sources of max attrition is going to be very important to us. With that said, I have two counters today, as do you, so make sure to head over to the like counter as well as the sub counter and increase those by 1 if you haven't already. Regardless, with the self-shilling out of the way, let's get into the modifier stacking itself. So, if you're going for the pure highest number possible of attrition, but bear in mind this will not help us exceed our attrition cap, you will actually need to start as a native, as you will need to pick up indigenous ideas. These guys are an interesting native as you have access to early expansion into the Aztec, but of course I would also have to give a shout out to the Caddo, famously being the native of choice if you have to play in this area, or a Native American for whatever reason. But thankfully, for us today, that is something we don't need to do at all. We have enough attrition from other sources to hit our attrition cap, even when we increase the attrition caps through other sources. As such, no need to endure playing as a native, at least not at the start. Instead, we need to go ahead and play as Finland. There's a couple options here, but the easiest way of getting it right away is to start as Sweden, and then create a vassal of Finland and select the option to play as them. This will, well, make you Finland and give you access to the Finnish missions, which is what you want. All you're looking for from the Finnish missions is the White Death upon Europe, which is going to affect a lot more than Europeans. This is going to give you +1 attrition for enemies, as well as some max hostile attrition as well. It also has some fort defense buffs and some combat bonus in the terrain of capital, but that's not something we're looking at too much here. We're just looking at the attrition for enemies and max hostile attrition, so we can go ahead and add those to the counter now, and head over to the next step, which remarkably involves forming the Inca. Now I've tagged into Cusco here, because Cusco has access to the Incan ideas, and the reason we're over here in the Inca is because their finisher gives us a max hostile attrition of +1. The surprising thing about the Inca is I thought there would be an endgame tag, but according to the Wikipedia, they're not actually, which is quite convenient since we'll be forming another tag later. Now I did promise you won't be starting as a Native American, doesn't mean you won't have to play as one. So yeah, go ahead and form the Inca. Good news is that you don't need to stay as them, we're about to form a arguably much better tag, although we'll have to keep the Incan ideas for the max hostile attrition. Our end tag today is actually going to be the Qing. We're doing this for the Qing missions, specifically one mission. We'll get to that in a bit. But we need to go ahead and form the Qing. Make sure to not take new traditions and ambitions, as we need to keep our Incan roots. While you're in the area, make sure to also have a quick pit stop in Korea, because we need to change our primary culture into Korean later. But before we go further, let's go ahead and sort out our ideas. We need to begin with defensive ideas, followed by religious, and then get yourself influence ideas, followed by quantity and infrastructure. Defensive ideas will give us access to +1 attrition for enemies and max hostile attrition +1 as well, which is quite useful. However, the other ideas are selected for the policies. We're able to get the Edict of Resistance for +1 attrition for enemies and a bit of national unrest reduction for us. And then get the Bolstered Defense Act for another +1 attrition for enemies and some garrison size increase. As well as Guerrilla Warfare for another +1 attrition for enemies and 5% shock damage. Now, one of the nice things that prevents us having to go ahead and do things like being native is actually the Great Wall of China. We're going to need to culture convert it into something Chinese that we can accept, and then we can upgrade it to level 3. This will give us +2 attrition for enemies globally. So what is this chain mission that I was referring to that is going to give us all of this attrition for enemies? Well, it's all about conquering Tibet, which when you do will give you access to this mission here. And then on this province you'll be able to get a massive +5 max attrition, as well as +5 attrition for enemies, which is quite convenient. The province in question is this one, which actually makes an incredibly nice fort. Not only is it a mountain, meaning that it's a good fort to, well, have in your country anyway, it also gives you zone of control over 2 ways of entering Tibet, either through the south here, apart unless you ignore this way, or going through the north, through, well, the deserts and mountains, so not the best way as well, but you kind of control half of those 2 pathways, so it's actually somewhat on the crossroads as well, so it's a convenient fort location, or to top it off. Now, I've mentioned being Korean as well, so go ahead and conquer Korea, and because Korean is not part of the Chinese culture group, even though we're an empire, we're able to switch our primary culture into it. I would recommend at this point synicizing yourself, because, yeah, Korean is a pretty small culture group, and there's going to be a lot of cultures you have just unaccepted. There's going to be a couple sad Chinese people indeed. But you can go ahead and grab the Hermit Kingdom if you want. You don't have to, but those reforms kind of don't matter until we get to tier 5. See, we went Korean to get access to the Righteous Army. And this is going to give us the ability to call the Righteous Army in times of need. What are these times of need? Well, we need to be either the defender in a war, or have 10 Korean provinces, well, not controlled by us, so occupied by enemies. And when that happens, we're able to lose 10 legitimacy and some more exhaustion, and also piss off our nobles. But then until the peace deal, we get 10 morale of armies, our taxes go down, but most crucially we get 3 attrition for enemies and 3 max hostile attrition, bringing up the attrition and max hostile attrition of the province up to a very impressive 16. Now, if you want to see a demonstration of the effects of fort attrition, I already stared at an AI very hard Ottomans for 4 hours of my life, failed to take Byzantium with an unsiegeable fort, and if you want to see an edited down version of that, a link should be available on screen now. So I thought, instead of doing some of that, let's do some theory crafting. How quickly does this attrition destroy armies in theory? Well, the base recovery rate of an army is 10%, when you reinforce 10% of your maximum unit size on the month tick, or 100 men in every 1k regiment. There are ideas and things that improve it, but 100 men is the base rate, and the rate we'll begin with today. However, this rate is hard when you're in enemy territory, or in occupied territory, or in area territory that isn't your home territory, down to 50 troops of 5%. This is probably why the cap was at 5%, as this means that with max manpower you're able to recover attrition indefinitely. You will at most take 5% attrition, or 50 troops, and recover those 50 troops. But let's assume our enemies have no reinforcement buffs. What is going to be the state of their army if they try to siege this fort? Well, let's spawn a hypothetical 100k stack to come siege us. This stack is going to take 16k casualties and recover 5k of those on the first month tick, reducing them down to 89k men. Well, after just 6 months, this army would have been reduced to 49,698 men. The AI would have lost 30,000 into reinforcements, as well as an additional 50,302 men from just their main stack existing, leading to an over 60k manpower loss in the first 6 months, without us losing a single soldier in the process. Now let's say they siege it for a year. Their main army is reduced down to 24,699, while they also have to spend an additional 60,000 on reinforcements that immediately disappear into the void, representing a total loss of 135,301 men. If they siege for 2 years, something not entirely unreasonable, their sieging army gets reduced to just 6,100 men on the dot, meaning that very soon, assuming this is just a level 2 fort, they'll lose the ability to make progress on it within the next month, and furthermore their total casualties will now be sitting at a rather impressive 213,900 men to attrition, again without a single loss of life on our part. This scenario has a weird loss graph for the AI, as it has a half-life decay curve for the losses of the army in the field, but the 5k reinforcements that arrive and die right away remain consistent throughout. Now that we mentioned half-lives, as you can probably tell by observation that the half-life is 6 months, but it more than halves in 6 months. So doing some math, the half-life of an army with an infinite manpower sieging this fort with no reinforcement buffs comes down to 5.948068069 months. What is 0.94803468069 month? Well, there are 30 days in a month. Correction, there are sometimes 31 days in a month, and sometimes even less than that. Actually, on average, there are 365.24 days in a year. Well, there would be, but EU4 does not have leap years or leap centuries. So we are back to 365 days in a year, or 30.416 recurring days in a month. Meaning the half-life of an AI army sieging the fort is 5 months and 28.8360548,701 days. Okay, on that note, I believe that's enough theorycraft. Attrition here is bad. So with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye.